We are going to learn a lot from her. So, thank you, Marisela. Take it away. Let's start. How you got into the business?
Yeah. So my name is Mariscela. I work as a director of photography. I'm here based in Los Angeles now, and I'm originally from San Antonio. And I got my start kind of right out of college. I was going to St. Edward's University in Austin, where I studied photography and realized I wanted to transition into film. And so with that kind of new shift that I wanted to kind of dip my toe into, I started interning at like the Texas Film Commission and volunteering at film festivals. And then that led to my first job as a loader back when they still shot more film on a feature that was shooting on 16 millimeter. And so I started working as a camera assistant and picking up any jobs as a production assistant in San Antonio and Austin. Back then, there was more television shot in Austin. I think it was like Friday Night Lights, and there was more Robert Rodriguez stuff happening. And then eventually, I was on these larger jobs and kind of realizing, wow, they always bring their cinematographers in from LA or New York, and was like, okay, well, I have to go to one of those places because that's where all of the bigger name talent was coming from. So I eventually moved to Los Angeles. This was like, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago and some change. And I was continuing to work as a camera assistant and then shifted over to the lighting side. I worked on as a gaffer and as an electrician on everything from independent films to really big TV shows. I think one of the last jobs I took as a union set lighting technician was like, I don't know, Mandalorian or Ahsoka or one of those Disney TV shows before officially like cutting it off and then just focusing on the camera side. Then I got into the union as a camera operator and kind of left the lighting side. And the entire time I was working as a cinematographer on a lot of smaller things, short films, short form episodic, some indie features. And now, and I kind of started that transition like just before the pandemic. And now I'm just fully working as a cinematographer and sometimes as a camera operator on some bigger things. And yeah, I mostly work a lot in the independent space. And then I'm working on kind of like breaking into the studio space and on larger projects. So that's the journey.
You think so? Can you let us know your role as a director of photography? What's your lane? What are you in charge of?
Yeah, so the director of photography is such a cool, in my opinion, I'm very biased, such a cool job on set because it's a role that's extremely collaborative. And if I had to like kind of scrunch the job into like one or two sentences, it's really my job is I'm the right hand person of the director. And what we do is we basically design the look of the film along with the director, and we collaborate on like what the style is, what the camera work is, how moody something is, like what the tone is through the lighting. And so you basically figure out what the look is with the director, and then it's your job to execute it with the various departments that you manage. So for me, I'm technically in the camera department and I manage that department. But then I have the lighting team, the set lighting team is also just under me. And then also the grip team is also under me. So you have two different types of lighting when it comes to film and television. You have electrical lighting and then you have non-electrical lighting. So like think of anything you have to plug in that would be like putting up a light. That's the electric side, anything that requires electricity. Non-electrical lighting would be more so like bringing in a black piece of cloth and kind of making this side of my face darker. I don't know if you can see the difference. So if I had like a bounce board coming from this side, I would have more light coming in. I can control that in a way that doesn't involve electricity. So that would be the grip side. I hope that makes sense. So I guess that's like kind of the main, I guess, the main role that we fill, but the role really begins in pre-production. And so we do a lot of prep with the director. We work with other departments to kind of define what the color palette is. I work a lot with the production designer, with the costumer. We'll also do camera tests for the makeup department, because it all kind of influences each other, and we all want to be on the same page and making the same movie, so there's continuity throughout the entire piece. Usually everything is like really curated, or at least that's the goal. And then, so that's kind of like the planning and the pre-production side. And then when you're actually in shooting the film, that's where like a lot of the work is done. That's kind of most of the work, where you're making the day-to-day decisions of like, how many cameras am I using? You know, do I want a dolly? Do I want a jib? Do I want steady cam? You know, how dark do I want this scene to be? Is it really scary, or is it a big bright comedy? And so you're kind of like leading the set along with the first AD on making your days and making sure you're like executing what the look is and making the director happy, and also hopefully fulfilling like some of your creative needs and wants as well. And then once you get done with the like physical production, everything you shoot will kind of go into post-production, and you kind of won't see it for a while. And then once there's a fine cut and you start getting into like the finishing stages of the editing process, you'll then come back in for I don't like to call it color correction. It's more of like color grading, because if you did your job, you're not really correcting anything, you're just enhancing and kind of getting it across the finish line. Because a lot of what we do, you know, we'll sometimes take an entire day to shoot one scene. You know, the light is very, very different at the beginning of the day than it is at the end. And so you can use color, the color grading session, to kind of help everything match a little bit better. To pop faces, you'll do a beauty pass. You'll set the look is working with various LUTs. Sometimes you get to design those in advance. Sometimes you do it on set. Other times it's a discovery on the back end. So it just kind of depends on your workflow, with what kind of mandates you have. If I'm looking at like how post is involved in this process, you know, regardless of the project that I work on as a DP, like we're really kind of like tied throughout the entire process. And a lot of that means pulling in post-production at a very early stage, before they have any footage to work with. And so what that means is like, we'll have a meeting with whoever, like we'll find out, you know, where does this film finish? Is it going to go to Netflix? Is it going to just be for the web? You know, are we shooting horizontal? Are we shooting vertical? All of those things inform the decisions that we make on set. And so what I like to do is have like a really strong plan involving post from the beginning, so that by the time they get it, everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what to expect. If we're working with LUTs, you know, if that's something we're doing in pre-production and where they're gonna like bake that into it. We'll also talk about like what file sizes, how many hard drives we need, how we're getting the footage from set to the post house. You know, how many copies we need of everything. Are we uploading dailies? I'll also work with the DIT on this to kind of figure out like what that workflow looks like. Yeah, so it's kind of like starting backwards and then seeing what, and kind of like playing that in reverse. And that is what informs a lot of the decision making on like what specs we film in. Did I get everything, Brenda? That's like kind of it, right? In terms of the post side.
Yes, I'm following the bounce ball. Yes. Yes, start backwards.
Yeah, it's a lot of information. It's a lot at all times. And sometimes
I can follow it. Says the person who's been doing this for yeah. It's all gonna be on the quiz, students. Yes, yes. Body, I definitely appreciate it. Do you think when you are on a project, oh, Larry, do you have a question?
Well, I was just gonna ask, because I know that you said that you, when you went to school, you went to school for photography, but I was interested in knowing what inspired you to go the path of film instead of continuing down, I guess what you would call the traditional photography.
Mhm. Yeah, no, thank you for asking. That's a great question. For me, it's like a personal decision. I found that when I was working as a photographer or even just as a student, I was kind of by myself a lot. And I was like in a stage or in a studio working by myself or in a field shooting whatever. And I just really craved like a collaborative environment. And I kind of missed working with other people. Because you're a lot of time you're kind of like it's scrappy, when you're first starting out, you're getting your own props and all the things, and you're in the dark room by yourself, processing film, printing. It's just it's a little more like isolating than than what I wanted. And so at the time, there were really, really amazing films coming out. Like, gosh, I think Itu Mama También had just come out. Amelie had just won like an Academy Award. I just felt really inspired by cinema. And I felt like I always had, like even since high school. And this was like back in the day before, you know, before social media, before all of those things, before we had like a computer in our pocket. I think like the internet had just come out like when I was in middle school. It's like everything was so new. And so I would kind of see like movie trailers on television. And then I would, kind of look at the newspaper because that was where we got most of our information from. And I would see these weird independent films that weren't advertised on TV. And I'm like, what's this? This looks interesting. And I always just went to go see like some random independent film. I was probably the only one in the theater, growing like as a kid. And just felt really inspired by things that were different. And when I started to see the work of like Emmanuel Lubezki, and Philippe Rousselot and like all these other really amazing cinematographers, I'm like, well, what is that? Like, what do they do? Movie sets have a lot of people on them. Like, this seems really cool. And it was also working off of a foundation that I already had. And so I was like, well, I can just take this set of skills that I have and just expand on it. And so I guess that's what kind of inspired the shift from still photography to motion picture.
And just to piggyback on that, did you find it kind of hard to transition over? Like, yeah, you had the foundations with photography, but was it hard to start jobs as a camera assistant, or did you find it was actually easy because you were assisting other professionals? And
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I think when you're first starting off, it's always interesting to navigate, a shift when you're stepping into like a whole new world or a new network of folks in a space where you haven't worked before. I will say I kind of got lucky because I got my first job from like as a fluke, like kind of as a fluke. When I was an intern at the Texas Film Commission, I saw the filmmakers that were coming in and scouting for their films. And so I kind of already knew like who was in town, who was working, and they knew I was like out of school for the summer looking for a job. And they were like, hey, we really need somebody in the art department. And I was very stubborn. I'm still stubborn. And so they offered me like an art PA, and I was like, no, thanks. I want to work in camera, and thank you, but goodbye. And then it turns out they needed somebody in camera, and out of like desperation on their part, they hired me because they didn't have anybody else. So that's how like that kind of started. But I mean, I think with anything, whether you're like trying to step into a whole new industry or even within the industry, if you're shifting from one department to another, it is oftentimes met with some frustration because people kind of like put you in a box and they only kind of tend to think of you in like one way. And so it takes like some transition time. So I think with anything, like as a whole, this industry, you guys, is not something where like your career is going to happen overnight. It's a very, very long, like marathon, and every opportunity, every job kind of informs the next one. And so it's something that you kind of build slowly. If it does happen very quickly, congratulations, you're very, very lucky and in the minority of folks who work in this business. But I do feel like, you know, it just takes time, and it just it's like with anything, you have to be consistent. And so sometimes that means taking an opportunity where you have to work for free or very low pay. That's just unfortunately how things operate, you know, because a really big job is not going to give you an opportunity unless your dad runs the department, you know. So a lot of times, if you don't have family in the business, you'll end up starting on much smaller things where you can get your feet wet, but like you might not be making any money right away, you know, or very little. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay, great. Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was curious about how you crafted your reel. Like, was it just like shots that you thought looked best, or you were like, oh, I remember shooting this one, I was like, oh, this one was like really cool, like I'm gonna put it in. And then like, did you get like a second opinion on that? Like someone else like, oh, can you watch these and like what looks best to you?
Yeah, okay. Also great questions. You know, I think so. I feel a little fancy saying this. So last year I was able to get representation, which means like I have agents who represent me as like an artist in my work and, you know, blah, 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 whatever. Prior to that, I would cut my own reels and send it off to like friends or people that I really trust for their opinion on like the music, like, oh, do you get bored? Is this runtime too long? Do you hate this shot? All kinds of things. Currently, I'm very spoiled, and because I'm with this agency, they have an in-house editor. So the process for that was I send them links to all my work. I kind of give them an outline of like, hey, I want to open on this shot, and I really want to make sure that we have that this shot and this shot and this shot makes it in. And I sent them a list of time codes. So it's very specific with what I wanted, but I told them like, hey, you know, whatever music you pick it, whatever order, just make it look as good as you can. And then they did that. And then I gave them a round of notes, and then I passed it over to my agents to just kind of sign off and like give their opinion. And then that was kind of it. So that's like the fancy way. But what I would normally do prior to that is like do something. It takes me way too long because I'm not good at editing. And then I'll send it off for some opinions, and then get it back, maybe do a couple rounds of notes, and then see how it does. And then I'll also have different reels for different things. So like I have a narrative reel, I have a commercial reel, and it's always kind of adjusting based on like the work that I've done. So I try to update it pretty frequently. There's even times where like I was up for a feature, I think it was last year, and my reel didn't quite totally speak to the style of that show, but I know I have elements that can. And so what I did, this is prior to having the reps, I cut a reel out of my work that I thought felt like this movie. So I cut a reel specific for one job in order to get it, which is a lot of work, but I had the time and I really, really wanted it. And so that's what I did. Did that answer the question? I think so.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Tori, you wanna go? And then Joe? Yeah.
What is the process of working with someone to like create that? You said you had worked with closely with the director, like what does that look like for you?
You know, for me specifically, I mean, it kind of, so in the pre-production process, it kind of works a little differently depending on the director. I try to like tailor it to whatever makes them the most comfortable, but like if I have it my way, I'll have the script. Hopefully they have a deck of references or at least some sort of inspiration. I'd like to just start off with just a regular conversation about like what inspires them about the project, what influences them just in general. Do they have any sort of like signature elements that they want to incorporate? Because I believe like every job you do is part of your legacy, and I know that sounds really insane. But it really is, like if you become someone who's really significant, people will look back at your work, and I think all of that is really important. So I'll kind of try and find out like who are they as an artist, and then what do I want this project to look like, and what serves the story. And so it's just a lot of conversation. We'll put together, I'll put together my own lookbook based on like the conversations and the things that we agree on. It's pretty hands-on. And then once we have that information, we'll kind of start discussing shots. This may or may not be before or after the scout, because a lot of times the location informs everything and shifts so many things. But we at least want to have an idea of what we're doing before we scout, so that we can just make more informed decisions. And then from there, we'll scout, we'll take a bunch of photos, we'll take notes. We'll kind of like narrow down what the shot list is. And then that's kind of like the foundation for what we'll take and go on to set and then execute everything. And then in between all that, I'm staffing, I'm hiring everybody in the department. I'm working with production to order cameras and G&E equipment. Sometimes on smaller stuff, you also have to coordinate transportation because, there's just less people wearing more hats. And then other times we'll also do, if I can, we'll do a camera test. And lately I've been working on the same camera, so I haven't had to test the sensors, but we will often test different lenses because sometimes you use more than one set of lenses on a show. So I'll want to see like what these primes look like paired with the zoom, or I had another project where we didn't want to use one set of primes, but I wanted to see what they look like, shooting like wide open versus a little bit more closed down, and does that give us like the look we're going for? Yeah, and so that's kind of like the pre-production process with the director. And then on set, you would think that I would spend more time with them, but I do not. What I try to do is already have all of that information like with me in my head, in my notes. I already know what we're doing. And that way the director really gets to just focus on working with the cast, and they're not worried about the visuals, the tech, the jib, the crank, the steady cam. They really get to just focus on story and emotion. And because they have a whole big cast to deal with, and like I don't want them to be stressing about anything that I'm doing. So that's kind of what the process is for me working with the director. I have some directors that are very hands-off. They just kind of work with the cast. We talk a little bit, and then I'm kind of like figuring everything out. And then I have others that really want to be involved, really want to know the lenses. Sometimes they're picking the lenses like, hey, can we do this on a 50 mil? Absolutely, or sometimes I might have to remind them like, hey, talked about maybe doing this on a 32 because this is the aesthetic that we picked for this part of the movie. So sometimes it's a little bit of a calibration, but as long as it's not a safety issue and it still works for like the continuity and the visual language of the story, like or kind of like absorb all of that as needed based on whatever.
So you mentioned you hire people. It's like your job. Okay, so on I assume you have to work with some type of budgeting, accountant, or that type of thing. How helpful / maybe artistic, for lack of better words, are they when it comes to that process? Are they totally just numbers by the book, or do they care about what you're doing?
I think that depends on the person. I have some producers that are, I mean, obviously the budget dictates everything. And in an independent space, like, it's a hard number. A lot of times you don't get more money, so you have to stay within like this space. If you are working with a big company or like with a network or a studio, sometimes you're given a budget, well, you can ask for more, or like something happens and they'll give you more money. You know, usually that they don't like that, but they're a big studio and that. So when I'm working with the producers, sometimes you have producers that are like just numbers, you have to make it work. Others I have that are a little bit more creative and more invested, and so they're able to kind of like shift things around to make it work. They understand the story, the goal. They agree that this choice is important. And so that I would mostly be working with like, you know, the UPM or the line producer. If it's a really small project, I just have a couple of producers and then I'm just talking to one or two folks about the budget. And it's like a push and a pull. So, you know, I might pull something from like, you know, I don't know, somewhere in my line item and then push it somewhere else because I need Steadicam for this day, or I need a dolly, or I need an extra person in the lighting department, or whatever it is. So it's a very collaborative experience. I don't think it's necessarily creative. It's just kind of numbers and trying to push things around. But it is still like working with a lot with other people constantly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hey, Matthew, if you could just mute, yeah, we can barely hear it.
And then, Marisa, I think there's a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Let's see. It says you've worked on many different projects in a variety of genres. Do you have a favorite genre to shoot? In your opinion, what's the most challenging genre to be for a VP? Cool. Okay. Yes. Definitely worked in a lot of different spaces. I move around a lot in terms of like what I work on because I don't want to just be known for like one thing. Because it's people tend to put you in this little box. Like if you get well known for something, then that's all anyone wants you to do or trusts you to do. So I always kind of shake it up. Just because I feel like it's more creative. But I lately, you know, I really enjoyed working in like the horror and surreal space. I've worked with this one director in the last year, 2 short films, and we did this like awesome Latino like vampire short film that just premiered at La Leaf. Actually, sorry, we had 2 films at La Leaf this year. La Leaf is the Los Angeles International Latino Film Festival here in LA. And we've done 2 films that kind of like blend surreal and horror, and it's just been so much fun because it gets wild. We did like on the vampire short, we did some stuff where we shot in like a fish tank and like did high speed work, so slow motion of like ink spraying across the water, and then to all further enhance that, we then had like a long probe lens that we like actually put in the water and did like different color inks and stuff. So it's kind of like, it feels like playtime and I really like it. So that's been really fun. And I feel like in terms of challenging, I'm not sure if like the genre necessarily dictates for that for me personally. I feel like every job is so different. I think what what would make something challenging is if I like had to do the same thing over and over and over again. It wouldn't be challenging in terms of like, oh, this is really hard. It would be like creatively maybe not fulfilling after a while. But I do think like the horror space is really interesting. Trying to think what else. I I think it just depends. Yeah, I mean, every film is so different. To speak to like one of the other shorts, that one was really challenging, also surreal horror genre. And I mean, we just had something different every single day. Like the first day we shot in this 100-year-old house in like, well, whatever, far away. And we had like a huge scissor lift outside the window with lights. And it was just like, whatever, a really big deal for a short film to have that amount of gear on a project that was so small. And then the next day, every day was like, we load in and then we load out. And that takes a lot of time. And then the next day we were at a completely different like sound stage, completely different set that was like really colorful. You know, the request for that one was that we had like 5 different colors in every frame at every given time. So that was a really big collaboration between like myself and the production designer. And then that involved like a lot of the effects. And so we kind of had to account for that. And then the following day was mostly a green screen day at another stage. And then we also had a stop animation artist come in. And so my team had to got to collaborate with the stop animation artist. This is the 3rd day of filming. And we set up all the lights for them. We lit the scene for them. I also, in the pre-production process on one of our camera prep days, we had them bring in their still camera, and we needed to kind of figure out the parts to put my lenses on their camera. So we really wanted to bridge everything as much as possible. And then we had our reference for that. So we knew what we were lighting to, we knew what distance the lens had to be from the subject, we knew what size, we knew how to frame it. All of that was discovered in the pre-production process working with this other artist. And then at the end of day 3, we had to go outside and then we did a location move for a night exterior. And then the next day was our last day. We did a half day. We drove like 2 hours into the desert, didn't shoot with any lights, day exterior. We had a LUT for black and white that my DAT made the day before. We were working with our post house for that one, but the black and white LUTs that they sent me weren't exactly what I was looking for. We had sent them in the pre-production process a reference photo from this really famous Mexican photographer called, her name is Mariscela. And we wanted this black and white sequence to feel like one of her photographs, both in like texture and grain, but also contrast wise. And so I had sent post and our colorist the reference photo. They kind of made a LUT for us. We got to take a look at it, and it still wasn't working for me. And so then I gave that to my DAT who we had on set. They then kind of made their own LUT. They gave me 3 versions of it. So then when we got to the desert, I had 3 options that were closer to what I wanted. And then we picked the one that the director liked the most, and that's what we used for this like black and white sequence. And again, it was the opposite of everything else we had done. There was no lights, we couldn't even use a bounce board because it was so windy. We were on top of these rock structures. It was just supernatural. And so that one was challenging because every day felt like a different film. Every day required like a different mindset, a completely different look. And sometimes like on the 3rd day, we had, you know, super heavy VFX, then we had the stop animation, and then we had to do an exterior where we were matching. We did one angle somewhere, and then we had to go to the actual location and steal it because we didn't have a permit. And we just had like me and like one other person and the director and the art department, like very guerrilla style, like stealing this exterior shot that we didn't have permission to get, but we got it anyways. So yeah, that one was a challenge because it just had so many different things in such a short amount of time. Yeah, I think that answers it. That was a very long answer. Oh, we got another question. Okay, so, okay. Informed you guys that I worked on Fast Food Nation. Could you tell us about your experience during filming, and did the final product change your perspective on the fast food industry? Oh my goodness. this was such a time ago. You guys, I'm pretty sure like a PA on this. Definitely the film was very influential when it came out. 100%. I think it really shifts your perspective on things of that nature. You know, because my role on that, I'm pretty sure I was a PA on it. Sometimes as a production assistant, you're oftentimes removed from the actual like production process because you're out running errands. You're maybe on lockup outside the building, so you don't really know what's going on on the inside. It was definitely awesome to work on something of that caliber and of that significance. And so that was really, really awesome to be able to do very, very early on, to be a part of something that had such a huge social impact. But that's kind of the thing with a PA, like, you know, sometimes I mean, your job kind of covers everything. You could be like picking up trash, you could be running errands, you could never step foot on set as a PA if you're like an office PA or a post PA. It just kind of depends, but I don't think I got to spend a lot of time on set for that one. Yeah. What else? What else? Any other questions? Oh, there's a gentleman right there.
So you mentioned you enjoy filming horror. Do you feel as though horror doesn't get enough recognition these days? And if so, why not?
Oh, no, I mean, I think a lot of people go watch horror films. They're some of the most inexpensive. It's one of the most inexpensive genres that you can make, and it's one of the highest grossing ones. That's why there's so many that come out so frequently. I think, wait, sorry, repeat the question one more time. So sorry.
Do you think that the horror movies don't get, I would say, let me change it, as much recognition? Because you know, you see these award shows and whatnot, and there's some great horror movies out there, but they're not winning any of the awards and things like that for either
Yeah.
script or the,
Um,
yeah.
I think it really depends on like, you know, what you value. Like if winning super big awards are important to you, then like, sure, these films don't get a lot of recognition in that respect. But I feel like, I mean, they have a huge audience. A lot of times it's a cult following. You know, you'll see them be really successful in other ways, like, you know, whether it's like merchandise or they're at Comic-Con. And I mean, people show up in droves for this. You know, you have something do really well at the box office. Just because it doesn't win awards doesn't mean that it's like a failure. I think you know, if we would have a lot less options in that genre if it wasn't something that was, if it was something that was not successful. So I think it just kind of depends on how that's defined. I think with a lot of the awards, you know, Emmys, Oscars, what have you, a lot of that I think can be very political and more of like a popularity contest. A lot of it really depends on like the membership who's voting, what that demographic looks like. You know, if it's like an older, you know, white dude might not like necessarily be super into something that's like younger and with people of color, or you know, fill in the blank. So I think it just depends on like, you know, who's watching, who's making these decisions, but I don't necessarily think it makes it a failure. I think there's a lot of people out there still watching these films, and supporting and enjoying the work that's out there.
I got one more personal question. So we talked about a lot about the equipment that you use. What's your favorite camera to work on, either for small projects or big projects? And what's your favorite lens?
Oh gosh. Okay, small projects. If it's like super, super small, right now I really like, I've been really, really impressed for like tiny, tiny things where you just don't have the money and you need to like buy something or borrow something from a friend. I think the Black Magic like 6K Pocket Pro is pretty impressive. for the price point, I'll just say for the price point. I think the Latitude is really fantastic. I've been able to take that camera and do like inserts for a larger project, and where I needed to match Area Alexa footage. And again, it's tiny. I'm doing like inserts of whatever, something really small. And it matches. I'm not saying it's the same quality. I'm just saying like it's got a lot of flexibility. It's really affordable. You do have to trick out this camera because it still needs all the accessories and stuff, but it's pretty powerful for what it is. It's very affordable. So if you go, so that's kind of like prosumer end. If I'm shifting to like high-end, super professional, I really love the Sony Venice. I like kind of anything in their line. I will be very honest, I haven't been able to work with the Venice 2 yet. The Venice 2 has like more sensitivity to it. But what I really love about the Venice 1 is, you know, it's got the dual native ISO. It's been really incredible because I think it's what, like 500 and then 2500 in terms of sensitivity. And that's huge when you're going into light and night exterior. It's extremely helpful. My work looks so much better because of this camera, because I can really like lean onto this amazing sensor that does a lot, that performs a lot better in low light situations and in the black levels. The camera also affords me to be like really speedy because it has like built-in like neutral density filters. And so if I have to make really fast changes on the go, I'm just like spinning a wheel versus like, I also like the Alexa 35, which is one of the newer Area Alexa cameras. Oh my gosh, that's my Alexa. The Alexa makes incredible cameras. I am not knocking Alexa, but if I was to kind of compare like Alexa, I think the ND, the internal NDs start at like a 0.6. Well, I'm missing a whole stock of ND, and sometimes you just need to make like smaller adjustments. And so in order to do that, I would have to put in a physical ND3 filter and then kind of like adjust the wheel. For me, it's one extra step. I don't want to think about it. I just do it kind of like incognito. It also comes into play like if I have Steadicam and I have the filter in and I'm like, you know what? The lighting changed. I don't need it anymore. Okay, well, we have to stop everything, pull it out. Steadicam has to rebalance, and I've now just wasted like 3 to 5 minutes. And so part of the job is being speedy and making your day. And so if I can do that internally with just like a little filter wheel, I'd rather do that, and it makes me look faster. But I like the look of the Sony a little bit better, but the Alexa like 35 performs a lot better in the highlights. So, you know, if I was doing something with snow or like in the desert during the day, I might lean more towards the 35. But if I'm doing a horror film or a lot of night exteriors or something where it's just really dark, I'll probably lean more towards the Sony Venice. Yeah.
And what's your favorite
Oh,
lens?
and then lens. Oh my gosh, lenses. Okay. That's really hard. I just got to work with the standard Baltars, which are really amazing. They're these like 100, again, I feel very spoiled. I have an amazing camera rental house. I will just say that. They always really support me. They're also Latina owned. I love them so much. It's the only one here in Los Angeles, and I drive across town to get gear from them. So with the standard Baltars, they're like these really interesting, like 100-year-old lenses that have been rehoused. So they look brand new because the outside is new, but it's still all of the same like internal elements. And those are really interesting because you have this really amazing like fall off on the sides. It has like a real dreamlike quality to them. They perform really differently depending on like what stop you're at. Like they have a much more creamier quality, like wide open than they do at a 4. It's just really interesting. I think they're super beautiful. And they were recently used on, oh my gosh, what film was it? It's the one with, what is her name? Oh, they were recently used on Poor Things. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, they used a bunch of different lenses on that movie, but like there's a scene where they're walking like in the garden and everything behind them is, well, actually, I'll show you. Hang on, I can show you guys. Brenda, do I have the ability to like share my screen at all today?
Hey, Professor Paul? Let's see. Maybe if you put it in the small, do you want to go to a website?
Yeah, I was just gonna go to another tab that I have.
Yeah, can you put maybe the link in the chat, and then Professor Paul, he's the puppet master on this.
Oh, okay, okay. You know what? He would have to have my like login in
Oh,
order to
okay.
do this, but that's okay.
I
There's
mean, I
one,
think you might be able to, because if I toggle over to next to right hand, I have share on the screen without me sharing what I have on. Let's see.
um, okay. There's, I mean, what's it
No.
called? Poor Things has a very distinct look to it. And there's a scene where they're like walking, you know, in the garden, and it has like this really incredible like vignette and fall off in the background, and that's kind of what these lenses do.
Okay, I'll show them, because I haven't seen that movie.
Uh-huh.
So it's in the garden, it's like a walk and talk.
Yeah.
It turns off on the top and the bottoms of the lens, and
Mhm.
it gives like a really like dreamlike effect for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty, it's fantastic. Um, uh, Maybe what I can do is put in the chat instead of the link, because I wanted to show you guys some like, so I did not work on Insecure. I know folks who did, but I wanted to kind of show like the different looks to it that they would do like in the color session. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit. Okay, what other questions? There's another one here. Okay, following up the last question, as someone that shifted from photography to such a polygon career, how do you recommend settling creative disputes in the workplace? Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, a lot of times you get hired based on like not only your work, but I think your personality also. It's a big effect on the hiring process, and how you act in like really intense situations, because it can get pretty intense. We work really long days. Um, and I think, you know, with any kind of like workplace dispute, you know, I think sometimes that comes from like just miscommunication. And so I think, you know, really listening to the other person will go a long way, even if you don't agree with them. But I think sometimes people just want to be heard, you know, at the end of the day. But I think it's, you know, there's compromise with anything. And so sometimes it's either, if it's like one element of maybe giving something up and satisfying like another department, or you know, maybe it's like something much larger kind of goes away, but then you gain something like later on. But I think it's you know, sometimes you have to like talk to the producer, and then they'll kind of help smooth things over or help like the communication pipeline. But I think you just have to kind of like take a deep breath, you know, if you need to like step outside for a moment to just to kind of like, you know, have like a quiet moment so you don't get too upset in front of everyone. And then kind of like going back in with a little bit clearer mind is really helpful. But I think if there is like, you know, something that is really causing some issues, I think it's helpful to like take that person aside, address it in private, but you don't want to embarrass anybody. You have to kind of think about it like, if somebody was upset at you, you wouldn't want them to kind of put you on blast in front of everybody, you know, and then everybody knows what's going on. And so I think just trying to be as respectful as you can, you know, as and yeah, and being as respectful as you can. And I think there's one of the nice things about the business is like you can do a job with someone and you're like, you know what? They're really talented. I'm really talented, but together it wasn't a good fit. And the nice thing is you don't have to work with them again. You can work with somebody once and you could never see them again for the rest of your career. So there's that as well. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. It is hard because it's a lot of people that you deal with. I think it's just being really patient. And sometimes it's harder to do that. But you know, I think you have to be really aware of like reputation, and you know, it's a really, really small industry and everybody knows everybody. And so just being aware of like how you present yourself, how you react in certain situations. And it's not going to be perfect. Like you'll have moments where you're like, gosh, could have done better. Or, you know, maybe I could have said this a little differently. But I think sometimes mistakes are really the best teacher, because you learn exactly what not to do. You learn what doesn't work. And then guess what? You'll never do that again. So like, don't be afraid to make mistakes in the beginning, because you're gonna do it. Like there's no way to avoid it. But I think it's humbling. I think it, you know, teaches you like it's the fastest and the best teacher, unfortunately. So, and just know mistakes are gonna be made, and it's okay, you know, because you're learning from them. Okay. Yeah, okay, that was a very long answer. Brenda, do you want me to go into like, how are we doing on time? Do you want me to go into days of life? Do you want me to skip to something?
No, I think we're doing well on time. I think we have another question. Joe?
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, cause like you previously had mentioned, when you guys are like scouting locations and stuff like that, and you take photos of stuff on the set. I'm wondering how much, maybe video you're taking there, like with your phone, like kind of like doing like a spec shoot or something like that. And then if there's anything that you, over your time of scouting locations that you're always looking out for, you know, something like in the back of your mind that you're like, okay, I need to make note of this every single time, like I'm coming here.
Yes, 100%. So, so it's like, for me, it's usually a combination of like photos and video. So I'll do like photos of the location inside and outside. So a lot of times we not only have lights inside, we also have lights outside the unit. So I'm just looking for just to be able to communicate with my lighting team, like, hey, this is what it looks like. These are the challenges. You know, we'll have room for this light. Okay, we don't have room for this. You know, we want to do whatever this lighting approach for this scene. So they just have the scope of what it is. Usually on a bigger project, you get to take those people with you. So they're taking photos and notes alongside you, which is super helpful. So if you're on a scout and you're the cinematographer and you can bring your gaffer and your key grip, that's the ideal scenario. And on bigger jobs, they'll be able to bring their best boy or their best girl, whatever. It's assistant, chief lighting technician. It's their assistant basically. So on a big job, they'll bring their assistant, and then you're just kind of like telling everybody what you want, and it's really fancy. But on a tiny thing, you're doing like all of that work. So like I was scouting last week for a short film, and I was by myself, like with the director and the other department heads. So photos and videos, to answer your question, I do those usually just on my phone. I'm trying to transition to like an iPad sort of situation, but whatever, later. So that's that. The other thing I wanted to show you guys, there's several apps you can do. There is this app called Sunseeker, and it kind of like shows like the map of the sun. So this one is super important. What I'll do is like it'll show me, I don't know if you can see this, but oh my gosh. Yeah, it oh no, it's
Where
messing
the
up.
sun is gonna be.
It basically tracks the sun, and oh, it's messing up. I'm so sorry, guys. Let's see if I can do it. Nope, it's gonna do it again. Anyways, it tracks the sun. It takes stills of that, and so I'll know where the sun path is. So when we're picking, like, okay, I need to shoot this in the morning or at the end of the day, I know what the sun is gonna do, or what the sun looks like at that time of day. There's also another app that I've just started using that I find is really helpful. It's called Polycam. And it basically lets you you can do like a LiDAR scan of a location. You can do a photo scan of a room. And it kind of almost does like, not like a map or a blueprint, but that's another way that you can like take the information from a set and then put that onto a plot and then figure out what your blocking is from there. So those are super helpful in terms of the scout. I also have, so there's a few different viewfinder apps. The main one is called Artemis. I don't really use that one anymore. I use one that's called CAD Rage.
Okay, I use the Black Magic one.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ones. I like the CAD Rate one because it doesn't have as many bugs, and also I can do multiple frame guides on it, and you can pick like the lenses, the aspect ratio. You can put what camera in, so it's not 100% perfect. It might be a little bit off. Sometimes it's off by like 10 millimeters, but it at least gives you a gauge. You can be in the space, like, okay, cool. I can do this shot, this really weird shot that I want with a 10 millimeter, so that when you go to do your gear list, you're really confident knowing like, okay, it's, we're going to commit to this 10 mil and it's not going to be like a 20 mil, whatever it is. Like it just helps you make a lot more firm decisions on the day. So those are my apps. They're all on my phone. I still take a measuring tape with me. I'll go look at the breaker box. I'll take a photo of the breaker box so I know like what the power is, if we need to supplement with the generator or like a little putt or whatever it is. Yeah, those are the main things. I can do most of that on my phone. I'll usually have like a little notebook and I'll kind of sketch out, certain things with my director. I'll have people stand in and we'll do like shots with the viewfinder app. And then I'll take those things and I'll put them into my my shot list with my director sometimes, and I'll take all those photos and videos and I organize them, and I can take that and send out to my lighting team. And then also on the scout, we're also figuring out, okay, where are we going to stage gear? Where are we going to put camera? Where are we charging batteries? Like all of those different things.
I have another one again. When it comes to, like, you said you transitioned from photo and then into film, and then I guess when you finally started working on sets, and even now, like you're saying that you work with like the Sony Venice and stuff like that, and I know like a camera rig can look like pretty crazy and stuff like that in terms of everything that can, like the attachment that can go on it. Is that something that you like learned yourself, like on the job, or is the rental house kind of helping you build it up and stuff like that for what you need?
Yeah, so for me, when I work as an operator, I'm not doing like the super specialty operating. So like if it's Steadicam, or anything in that zone, that's usually a specialty operator that you would hire that owns their own rig. Um, and so they would be the ones to operate that. If it was handheld or something simpler, I can definitely do that. And that I would like talk to the rental house and say like, okay, I need an easy rig. And I need it to be this kind of easy rig for whatever it is. Because sometimes it's just the camera. Sometimes you do put like whatever, some sort of gimbal or something like on top of that, and then it's just support. And then I also have like an ergo rig, which I use. Sometimes I've worked in a little bit in like the dock and the reality space as an operator, and that's like such a huge back saver. That's something that's specifically tailored to your body, and it's pretty affordable. And they make one that's just for ladies, and they make one for short people, and I'm both of those. So it's really helpful. But I think it's a combination of things. I think it's like knowing the tool that's right for the job, that's right for your body, that gets the shot that you want, but it's really like, how do you make how the audience feel, what you need them to feel. And so once you figured out what that tool is, you'll figure out where you need to rent it from, or like my little ergo rig, I bought that. That was an investment. It was like a couple $1,000s. But then you get a kit fee for it, so it eventually pays itself off. But there's also like so many opportunities, you guys, like at least here in Los Angeles. I'm not sure how active things are in San Antonio. I know there's a lot of activity as well in Austin. But places will often have like events and seminars. Like I know the vendor that I work with here in LA, they're always doing things for like camera assistant seminars. If you go to expos, like Cinegear was just here in LA, and it's like all the gear, all the toys, and you just get hands-on with everything. So if you don't necessarily have like a vendor that you work with, make a friend with somebody that does have this gear, and maybe you can like hang out with them and practice. Like, it's really just being familiar with the tools so that you're comfortable and confident when you go on the set and you know how it works. You're not questioning anything. I mean, you don't have to know everything, but you have like most of what you need to kind of get it done. And so it's like just practicing and finding those opportunities, sometimes creating them for yourself in order to get the information that you need to do the job. Yes.
So talking about San Antonio, you came from San Antonio, talked about how you moved to LA, to find more opportunities. Do you feel like it's still necessary for someone, especially if they want to do what you do, to go to LA? Or I know the ongoing thing is LA, Atlanta's starting to build up too. Or if we were to stay here, are there some ways to better promote ourselves in order to reach the level that we want to be at?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think it depends, because I feel like if you're in a smaller market, let's say like basically not LA, not New York. A lot of times I think creatives end up wearing more than one hat frequently. So like you're a DP, you'll probably also be a gaffer because there's less work available where like in San Antonio and Austin. I know other DPs who aren't just DPs, they do other things. Even in LA, you guys, I'll still work as an operator on like larger things if I don't have something else coming in, or if I need like whatever hours for health insurance and things like that. So I think it just kind of depends. I feel like for Texas, I feel like a lot of commercials and industrials shoot there. So it's kind of like in the Bay Area here in California, it's a lot of corporate work, it's a lot of industrials, a lot of commercials. And so if you do stay in a territory like that, there's nothing wrong with it. You're just mostly going to be doing work in those spaces. And so you have to really figure out, what is it you want to do, what kind of career you want to have. And I'm not saying you can't shoot features and other things in those territories, you definitely can, but that probably won't be the bulk of your work until you've really, really established yourself. And so like Atlanta is popping. It is, from what I hear, it's also like oversaturated with folks because a lot of folks are leaving California because it's way too expensive here. And moving to other territories like Austin, like New Mexico, like Atlanta. And so you'll kind of end up being like a little fish in a bigger pond that might not have a ton of work. So again, you might be in that same situation of wearing multiple hats, of having to crew for a while before you kind of get your footing as a DP. You could get really lucky and get onto a project that does really well, and then you just kind of ride that momentum. And who's to say like you can't be based in San Antonio or Austin, and then you have the ability where you're on projects that just take you to wherever. That's the dream, really, to live wherever you want, and then for the jobs to come to you. But that takes some time, to build up that kind of a portfolio. And it's really like about community and your network. And you kind of have to know the folks that are doing the bigger things. And they could be in your hometown. That could very well happen. But more often than not, I feel like people who are really like pushing things and calling the shots and getting the gigs are in other territories like New York or LA. So, there's a mentor of mine who lived in New York for a while and did really well, got herself established, and then moved back to Miami and started a family. And now she lives in Miami, close to her family, with her, with her family, with her kids, and she gets flown out to wherever to work. So she can work as a Miami local, but she's not known as the local Miami DP. Does that make sense? Like, so yeah, I feel like if you get to a place where you're like needing to expand your network, if you can't necessarily make the move, I would say go to Cinegear, go to like an expo and meet people, go to NAB in, in Vegas, go to Cinegear in LA. There's also Cinegear, I think, in Atlanta. There's other conferences, there's a lot of networking opportunities that you could just go do for like a week or two, meet a lot of folks, get on their radar and then come back. Right now we're in such a really interesting time because social media, and also just the ease of everything being digital, you have all of this at your fingertips. And so there's no reason why you can't just do outreach from where you live and see if somebody is willing to like work with you and like take you with them somewhere else. So I feel like it's not completely impossible. It's just might be a little bit harder initially to make those connections.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Mari, I have a question. So I had the students watch Insecure season 3, episode 8, and that because I asked you what you would recommend as a DP in your lens. I watched it, and so I had very specific post items on my end. Okay. That I would touch, right? And so on your end as a DP for that specific episode, what do you like about it, or what caught your eye? What is it why did you recommend?
Oh gosh. Well, it's such a beautiful show. A lot of times I feel like it's in the past it has this is like kind of one of the first times where you see like more melanated skin tones presented in like such a beautiful way. And I feel like it's so inspiring to see something like that. It's so well done. And it has an incredible color palette. I think, the things this is a show that like, like if I was the DP on this, I think it's like setting the look, and there's not a lot of VFX in it, like unless you're replacing billboards and stuff. I don't think it's super heavy on like on that front. I think in that episode specifically, the considerations would be like, okay, well, how are we handling the tech in all of these? So like TV screens, text messages, if someone's texting on their phone, is it going to be done practically? Is it going to be green screen? Or is it gonna be done? Are we gonna film the person and then it's gonna be a text pop-up? Okay, well, how do I, how do I accommodate for that? Where do I want to put the person? Should I put the person, here so that the text box can be here? How do I want to frame for that? How does that affect the composition? And so we would probably do like VFX on the slate to communicate the post, like, okay, something is gonna happen in this shot specifically or in this scene. And so, yeah, I think that would kind of be like, I guess the main thing for that. And in this one, in this episode in particular, there's a few different looks to it because you have like a day exterior look, you have this really cool night exterior look where they're like going to watch a movie at the cemetery, and that's got like a whole different vibe to it. And then you have another nighttime interior look where they're at like one character's apartment and then they go to another character's apartment, and how do those two look in comparison to each other, but at the same time, how does it all feel like the same like movie or episode, and it's not completely wild from one scene to the next. So those are the main things that I would look for. It's not overly complicated on this series, but it's so well done in my.
I have a question.
Yes. Go ahead.
So from a DP's perspective, like a TV show like Insecure, where there's a lot of like, I don't know the term for it, where there's a lot of different locations that you have to film at. It's not always on the stage or in the studio. Is that exciting for a DP, or is that kind of a nightmare? Like, all right, you're always having to plan how to adapt to the different environments and things like that.
Yeah, I think from what I know about the show, I think a lot of the interiors, like the homes of the main characters, the interiors are all on a stage because they know they're going to come back to that like more often than not. And so it's a mixture of like, practical exteriors because it's in LA, so they get like, real exteriors there. And I mean, for me, I think it's exciting. It's a lot more work, because but that's also the job. Like how cool is it to light the Hollywood Forever Cemetery that's like iconic at night, and it's just like your playground for the night. Does it suck to be there on an overnight where your call time is probably 5 p.m. to 5 a.m.? Yeah, that's not so great. But it's like it's such a cool opportunity to be able to do that. And I don't know how many days they shot that over. They could have done that over a couple of nights. I'm not really sure. But I just think it's a cool challenge. It's part of the fun of the job, and I think it's always awesome to kind of stay on your toes. And that's one of the things I really love about it, because every day can be very different. Every job is very different. You could be on a stage, in studio mode for like whatever, however long on a job. And then the next job's completely different. Your exterior, your handheld, it's crazy, it's whatever. But like, I think that's just part of the style and part of the fun is you get to be like this little chameleon, sometimes from project to project or week to week. It's part of the job, and I think it's challenging, but I think it's really fun.
Anyone else? Any other questions? No. Okay. I think Marty, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Oh, we have one more question.
Okay.
I was just curious, what's the creative process of lighting a black and white scene? I saw there was a your demo reel.
Oh, it's just black and white on my demo reel. I don't know. I mean, the black and white. So all of that is, oh, I know what's on my reel now. That was all done, that was shot on a digital camera. And so for that one, it was like tiny, tiny, tiny. So I didn't have a DAT or anything fancy like that. So we had references for that project. We wanted it to feel like really weird and scary and like Kafka-esque, right? So whatever, pretentious, fun things that you get to play with. And so for the lighting side of that, all we did is the simplest thing to do when you don't have a lot of resources is we just turned the monitor monochrome. And then we had a black and white image to look at. So it's shot in color, but then you know you're just gonna like take everything out in the color session, and that's what's gonna give you the image. So the cool thing about that is if you know you're committed to it, you have to be committed because that means you can use any kind of light. Because color temperature doesn't even matter at that point. Just don't change your mind, because if you mix daylight and tungsten, it's gonna be really weird if you put it back in color. Or it won't look like how you want it to look. So for that one, that was like the simplest way to kind of get us to that black and white reference monitor, because we just didn't have a lot of resources. And so for that one, I talked to my gaffer about having like harder sources on the face. We wanted it to feel kind of scary, so we had like uplights on people. It just creates like more scarier shadows. Because of like the kind of Kafka-esque like geometric shapes that we wanted, I had the Griffin Electric team just take like a 4x4 open frame. They're like the normal diffusion frames that you would have in a G&E, in a grip kit. And we just took 2-inch black gaff tape and we just did like a crisscross kind of pattern on that. And then we put that in front of a really hard light in the deep background and blasted that on the back wall. And then we kind of gripped it down to kind of give it some shape. And we made sure that it wasn't super bright back there, that we had the main character was like the brighter thing in the frame. And so that one was really fun because we just played with shapes. I got to play with a little bit harder lighting. We even had some lights in the shot because we had this like, oh my gosh, what is it called? We had put Vaseline on a filter in front of the lens to make it really weird and dreamy. So part of the frame, we couldn't even tell what was in it. So we just put a light back there and like, who cares? Because it looked great. You can't tell what it is. So we got to be like really artsy and creative with that one. And that was kind of the general approach. And then I just had like a really wide 18mm lens that I just like shoved in the cast faces for that. And the nice thing with that lens is that like it's so wide that you can do a big close up on someone, but still see the background and still see what's around them. So it's more interesting opportunities in my opinion.